We felt scattered. I thought, why do we have two different financial advisors? One's doing one thing, one's doing another thing.
We felt sometimes like we were being guided in directions to spend extra money on things that probably weren't always necessary for us.
I would not know for sure if I should put my money in here or put it in there. Should I buy this real estate?
Like, I don't know what to do with this money, and I don't want to just blow it and spend it.
We were concerned about our financial health and just wanted a better financial picture.
And so when Earned came onto our radar and we sat down with our financial advisor, it just felt different.
I think a physician specifically should look at Earned because the focus is on our field. They know what a physician goes through at different phases of our career. To have that knowledge in order to guide us, I think is just such an advantage.
Earned isn't just about giving us financial advice. They're about doing the things that are needed to be done in order for you to fulfill your financial plan that they have created with you. And that really was very meaningful to me.
Earned is kind of like the conductor of an orchestra. You know, you pull in the trombones, you pull in the trumpets, you pull in the percussion. But Earned is the one that's holding the baton. I feel trust that they're taking care of my entire financial picture, not just one little part of it.
As a physician, I know that what I do for people is really powerful and impactful, and it's important for me to know that the level of expertise that I'm working with for my financial health is there, and I have that trust for them.
It's definitely valuable because I don't have to go looking a million different places. Like, I don't have a lawyer over here, and I don't have, the insurance thing over here. Everything's under one roof.
Earned brings clarity to my financial life.
With Earned, I feel really well taken care of.
I feel my financial health is secure.
I feel supported.
Earned is security.
I would highly recommend any doctor to look at Earned.
I love what I do, and it's really important for me that my patients have the utmost trust that I'm taking the best care of them. I have that same amount of trust with my financial advisors at Earned.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. We are so excited for you to join us today for early financial moves that can make or break your career. I'm Amber Eckerfield, Marketing Manager of Education and Experiences here at Earned, and I'll be your moderator for today. Whether this is your first webinar with us or you've been with us for a while, we are so glad that you are here. Earned is the first fully comprehensive tax and wealth firm built specifically for doctors, their families, and their practices. We bring tax planning, investing, retirement strategy, practice level advice, and fully integrated insurance and legal coordination all under one roof. We are the one team that sees your entire financial picture so that every piece works together instead of pulling it in different directions. Let me go over some housekeeping for you before we begin our awesome panel for today. Here are some webinar features that you should be aware of. We have a nice chat feature. Say hello, ask for tech help. Please use it to let us know where you're from. If you have questions, use our question icon at the very bottom of your screen. We will use those to answer those live at the very end of our panel. And then, of course, access the apps or the More button to get a free consult, and the link will be provided right there. I have an awesome speaker lineup for you today. Our first one, Dr. Stephanie Pearson, is the Managing Director of Insurance here at Earned. After practicing as an OBGYN, a career-ending injury revealed critical gaps in physician disability coverage, an experience that now fuels her mission to protect healthcare professionals. Combining firsthand clinical insight with deep insurance and expertise, Stephanie advocates for physicians nationwide, helping them navigate complex disability policies, safeguard their income, and avoid costly mistakes. Ali Aramchian is a nationally recognized healthcare attorney who advises dentists, physicians, optometrists, veterinarians, and more on complex legal matters, including practice transitions, partnerships, employee agreements, estate planning, and regulatory issues. Ali is a frequent speaker and educator across the country, known for helping healthcare professionals navigate critical legal and business decisions with clarity in conferences. And our third speaker for today is Carol Foos, Managing Director of Tax here at Earned, and a CPA with more than 25 years of experience in tax planning and financial consulting for physicians and business owners. Carol's also a prolific educator and co-author of numerous financial resources, and she is frequently lectures on tax planning, wealth management, and helping physicians build and protect their wealth with clarity and confidence. I am so excited for you to meet all of our speakers today. Go ahead and join me on stage so we can kick off this panel. All right, Ali, kick us off. Again, welcome everyone. Really excited for you guys to be here. We are going to be focusing on early career, what not to do so that you have a successful career.
Awesome. Thank you, Amber, and welcome everyone. Today, we're going to talk about something that almost every doctor wishes they had understood way earlier in their career. And the first really 5 years of your career are very unique. You're finally earning an income. You may have had hundreds of thousands of dollars in student loans. You're signing your first employment agreement, or maybe you're buying into a practice. And then suddenly, every financial decision feels important. The challenge is that most people who approach these decisions, they approach them separately. They think about insurance later, right? They sign the contracts without legal review. They don't really think about taxes until April. But the reality is these decisions are connected, and a mistake in one of these areas can absolutely impact everything else. And that's why we brought together two experts who look at the same career through very different lenses. And so our goal today is very simple. If you're early in your career, we want you to leave knowing a handful of decisions that can dramatically improve your financial future. And so we're going to break it down into a couple of different segments. The first is going to be your first contract. And then as you go on with your career, we're going to be talking about the different aspects of it. How do you protect your income after you sign your first contract and you start working? How do you build wealth after that? And then we're going to bring it all together at the end. So Dr. Stephanie Pearson, Carol Foos, welcome, and nice to have you on the panel.
Thanks, Ali.
Yeah. So let's start, as I mentioned, where almost I think every doctor's career begins, which is with an employment agreement. They've spent years becoming an expert clinician, and then one day, they receive this 15, 20-page legal document, and they're expected to sign it in a few days. And of course, what do most people do? They flip to the compensation page and they ask, well, how much am I making, right? They've been in school for so long. That's really the thing that, fascinates them the most. But what I think is that those contracts actually tell, three very different stories depending on who's reading it. So obviously, as an attorney, I'm looking at the legal risks. Carol, you're looking at the future tax consequences, which we're going to talk about in detail. Stephanie, you're looking at it at how well the income can actually protect them long term if something goes wrong. So let's go through that same agreement together, okay, from three different lenses. Okay, so Carol, I'm going to start with you. If I handed you the same employment agreement, what immediately jumps out at you from a tax perspective? Before someone even starts working, like what decisions in that contract can dramatically impact, how much of their paycheck they actually keep?
So I think certainly looking at how are they going to be paid? Are they a W-2 employee? Are they a 1099 contractor? Because we see both with initial contracts. That has a huge impact that a lot of people, especially in those early years, don't really understand, right? You're getting paid, you're maybe looking at total comp. What does that look like? And you need to understand, how do those two things impact benefits, your payment of taxes, who's paying half of the Social Security and Medicare taxes, things like that.
Mhm.
And I think that's a very basic level of understanding that generally people just getting out might not know and really do need to ask a CPA as an example, or an attorney who's reviewing the contract. What does that exactly mean?
Yeah, exactly. And just to kind of dig deep on that a little bit, when you're a W-2 employee, the employer pays for half of your, employment tax, some of your employment taxes, FICA, Medicare, and so on and so forth. If you're an independent contractor, this is where people get in trouble, right, Carol? Because they don't realize that they have to pay that portion of the tax, and sometimes they don't do the planning for that.
Exactly. So if you're a W-2 employee, not only does the employer pay half, but they're also withholding your half of the Social Security and Medicare taxes. So if I'm a 1099 contractor and I have to pay my taxes via estimated payments because nothing's being withheld, I automatically, 15.3% gets added on top of that as Social Security and Medicare tax, at least on the first couple 100,000 of income until I reach that Social Security maximum. And
Yeah.
that's a big surprise to a lot of people.
That's a big surprise. Yeah. And as a pro tip for everyone who's listening, if you are hired as an independent contractor, make sure you set a professional corporation or a PLLC or an LLC, depending on the state that you're in, because you get a lot of tax benefits and your chance of audit goes down. There's a lot of perks to being an entity if you're an independent contractor. And so I know some of those rules are a little bit murky these days, but if you get hired as that's a good way. Now, Carol, production versus salary based compensation, how does that impact their tax planning, if at all?
Well, so again, right, salary is more consistent. So you can pretty much, even if it's salary plus bonus, right, you have a pretty good estimate of what that's going to be. Production based, I think when you're first starting out, that's a tough, estimate to come up with because you don't know what your production's going to be. That could
Right.
also mean your income is sporadic, right? You might have busy weeks or busy months and less busy weeks and months. And for budgeting purposes and things like that, even beyond taxes, that can be difficult for your planning purposes, for your savings, for your retirement planning, putting money into your 401k or whatever it might be. So those are all things that you really need to think about and sort of budget out. And it's harder to do on production based. Not that that can't be more lucrative, but it can be harder just to have consistency and make a budget.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's what I was just going to mention. A salary is a salary, of course, but then when you have production-based compensation, you can potentially make a lot more. But you, like you said, there's that risk of sometimes not making anything because patients cancel or they don't show up, or the owner gives you lower production cases, right? Whereas they keep the
Right.
higher production cases. So there is a little bit of give and take. What I can tell you as an attorney, for everyone who's listening, we like a hybrid approach. We like a base salary for you, something that is digestible for the practice, that you can set forth your budget for your life, your mortgage, your insurances, all the things that you need to just live. And then you get paid the higher of either your base salary or like a production, which they kind of take into account as bonus and whatnot. And I think that gives you the best of both worlds, where you can base your life on your budget, but then you've got all this other benefits from a production perspective. So okay, let's shift gears a little bit and talk about benefits, because when most people look at benefits, they glance at these contracts, they don't necessarily pay attention to the two things that I think are really important. Whether it's disability insurance or malpractice coverage, and sometimes they'll say, "Oh, great, I'm covered." But Stephanie, I know that's usually not the full story, right? So when you review the benefits sections of these employment contracts, what do you see most doctors miss, like completely miss? And what assumptions maybe are people making that can leave them like financially exposed?
I think that the biggest assumption is, as you mentioned, they believe that they're covered for everything by their employer. Now, I don't do malpractice insurance, but as a former OBGYN, I will glance and see what kind of malpractice they have as far as, is it occurrence or is it claims made? And the reason being that you really want an occurrence policy that's going to cover you if you move jobs. So if I see that it's claims made, I'll say to somebody, hey, I'm not a malpractice person, but tails are really expensive. Tails being if you go from one job to another job, if you have a claims made policy, you're not going to be covered moving forward unless you buy what's called a tail, which kind of back covers you. And those can be really expensive depending on the type of physician or doctor that you are. So I think that's one thing I really just jettison to and look for more out of. I've seen people make really bad decisions. As far as disability insurance goes, most of the time, honestly, docs aren't even looking to see if that's there. It doesn't even cross their mind. And then it's a function of getting them to get that actual policy, because it may say one word, right? The employer will provide disability insurance, but that doesn't give you the details. It doesn't tell you how much they're covering. It doesn't tell you what's the definition of on occupation, what's the definition of total disability. Are there other things that are hiding in that document?
Yeah.
And then to look at that against, have they gotten a private policy and training or not, right? So if I'm talking to somebody with their first employment contract who has never gotten a policy, it's a big miss, because there are huge trainee discounts that people can get before they get that first contract. And it amounts to thousands over the life of the policy.
Yeah, yeah. You know, when my wife was in her residency program, I think I shared this story with you a long time ago. When she was in her residency program, which was in Ohio, and we lived in California at the time. Before she finished her residency, an insurance expert who came in and talked about disability had her get disability insurance while she was in Ohio, because the rules in Ohio at the time, this is 20 some years ago now, were much more favorable than in California. And you never hope to have to use disability insurance, but as we know, right, having worked with thousands and thousands of doctors, Stephanie, your own personal experience and some other experiences that we've had, injuries happen, and you can't plan for it. I mean, that's why they're always surprising and disappointing and upsetting, is because it can happen skiing or surfing or or delivering a baby or as my wife did, and I don't know if I shared this story with you guys, but she was moving some tables a couple months ago, and for an event at her office, and she threw out her back, and they're talking about neck surgery and this thing. I mean, you just never know. And so I think getting disability insurance early on, Stephanie, is probably one of the keys of success.
I think it's one of the first keys. We talk a lot. Everyone has homeowners insurance, health insurance, right?
Yeah.
Car insurance. Your biggest asset is your ability to make money in the future. And you talked about injuries happening. That's actually only about 10% of claims.
Oh.
Illnesses don't discriminate. And the issue when you're young is you're usually young and healthy. So you're not thinking about this, right? And we have kind of this undertone of invincibility when we're young, but cancer doesn't discriminate, and TBIs happen, and other, musculoskeletal issues are the number one reason that doctors leave practice. And you want to get a policy when you are young and healthy. When you don't need it is when you want to buy it, right?
Yeah.
So that they're covering you from head to toe in the event that something happens.
So the audience is listening, right? And they hear the importance, they care about it, but they don't know what to ask. So Stephanie, let's start with you, and then Carol, I'll go to you. What question should someone ask about disability insurance or malpractice coverage before they accept an offer, Stephanie?
For the disability, it's not as straightforward. They want to actually see the documents, and it's a little bit of a bane of my existence because HR doesn't always know what we're asking for.
Sure.
But you don't want to rest on that one line in the contract. Now, if it's an employer paid policy, there's really nothing you can do about it. You're going to get enrolled. If it's voluntary and they're saying, hey, we have it, you need to pay for it, you really do want someone looking at that policy for you to let you know, is that a smart financial decision? Often, if you're happy, healthy, and intact, it's not a great decision because group benefits tend to be inferior and you're better to spend your money on a private policy. Additionally, you want to make sure that you have an individual policy to begin with. So there's a little bit of a marriage between the two. As far as malpractice goes, I do urge everyone to go back and negotiate for occurrence or figure out what would it cost for a tail if you decided to leave, and what is your employer's stance on that, because sometimes you can't negotiate and get what you want. Sometimes you can. But if you're stuck in one position, you want to make sure then that you're planning appropriately if you change jobs and really budget for that tail.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And as another pro tip for those of you on the malpractice side, if you get your own malpractice while you're in residency or in school still, try to maintain that through your jobs. Even if someone's going to give you malpractice, try not to drop yours. Maybe they can reimburse you or something of that nature. Try to keep your coverage throughout your career on your own, because the likelihood is you might one day open up your own office, or you might do something else. And if you drop your own insurance, go on theirs, and then try to come back, then your rates will be through the roof because of a lot of the things that Stephanie just mentioned. So yeah, no, I think that's a great point. Carol, what about you? What questions should they ask from a tax planning or financial perspective in their contract as they're, obviously there's all the legal stuff, but from a financial planning perspective?
Right. I think it's a lot of, sort of drilling down on the compensation and benefits, really understanding that production-based compensation or a production-based bonus, if that's a factor. How does that work? Understanding again, I say all the time, unfortunately in med school, they're not giving you a finance class, right? Or tax class. So even understanding sort of the basics of a 401k plan or a 403b plan. What does that match really mean? What does a profit sharing contribution mean? What's that mean to me? How's it determined? Is it a set amount, or is it, based on the profitability of the practice or things like that? I think those are hard things to know when you're just coming in. And then I think secondary to that is really understanding all the employer provided benefits. And, much like Stephanie said, not only the disability, but sort of life insurance and group term life. And can I purchase up to get some multiple of my compensation? Or because again, all those things matter. And the younger you are and the healthier you are, the cheaper the insurances are. So if you want to buy up, it's buy up now when you start. A lot of times, if you don't do it at the beginning of the job, then you do have to answer, medical questions, et cetera, if you go back a year from now or 2 years from now and want to do some of those things.
Yeah,
So,
I love that. And I think you bring up a really great point, because the compensation sections of these contracts can be really confusing. Like if you're a physician, the whole concept of RVUs can be kind of, not easily understandable and not common sense. It's like, well, what is an RVU and how does it really work? And what am I getting for it? And so that can be complicated. If you're a dentist, what does production versus collections mean? How are they collecting for you? Are you getting paid on the hygiene? Really important. If you're an optometrist, or an ophthalmologist, it's like, okay, am I getting paid on just the medical exams, or am I getting paid on the frames and the optical department, and how does that work? And so compensation wise, it can be really, really tough. Same thing if you're, a veterinarian, like, are you getting paid on the other things besides the medical exams and stuff on the on the small pets? So there's a lot of complications there that I think doctors generally want to accept when they see these contracts, but I think asking questions is smart, and doing it, in a clear way gets you that clarity that you want when you go into that first job, because the more complex it is, the more problems it could create. So yeah, go ahead, Stephanie.
And one other thing that I think a lot of doctors don't think about, and I was not taught at all, is that there are other things to negotiate for. You mentioned they're looking at that one compensation number, but you can get income from so many other places, right? Do they give you CME money? Do they give you a stipend for lunch, right? I mean, there are so many other little places that people can negotiate and increase their total compensation that nobody taught us about.
Yeah,
I
Stephanie,
think
if
also,
you can go for lunch, I want to come work for you. All right.
I just threw that one out there. I've been.
but
in a
even
couple of
things like, are
hospitals.
you allowed to have sort of what we call a side hustle, right? Are you allowed to
Right.
be an expert witness or provide consulting, or does all of that income have to go to the practice and then get paid out accordingly? Just things like that,
You're right.
important to understand.
Yeah, or the thing to do these days is becoming a med spa physician on the side. So yeah, I
Right,
totally
exactly.
So okay, so to wrap this segment up, I think the biggest takeaway for everyone listening is your employment agreement isn't just a legal document, and that's hard for me as a lawyer to say, by the way. It's a blueprint for your financial life, and because it determines like how you get paid, we talked about how you're taxed, what protections you have if life doesn't go according to plan, right? And even what opportunities you'll have after you leave that job, and what restrictions do you have. So before you sign, make sure you've looked at it through all of these three lenses that we just talked about, and make sure you're focusing on those, because I think from a as you get into your first contract for your first couple of jobs, those are the most important. So, all right, let's pivot now to protecting the income you've just negotiated, right? So you've signed your contract, you've got the right contract, you're in the right job, and let's assume all that went well. You're finally earning great income and your career is taking off. But then here's what is, I think, a major question that, for everyone who's listening to think about is, what's your most valuable financial asset today? Okay. Now, some people might say it's my investment account, but I would argue that that's not it. It's not your home. And for many of you, it's definitely not your savings account, especially if you're coming out of school, right? I think your greatest asset is your ability to generate income over the next 30 or 40 years. Because for most doctors, that's worth millions and millions of dollars, right? And it's also the asset that people are sometimes least likely to protect, because Stephanie, as you mentioned, we're young, we're healthy, you don't think about it, and you hope that nothing ever happens. But Stephanie, I'm going to go to you, and I know this is going to get personal, but you've lived this personally, and it gives you a very unique perspective that very few people have when they're talking about policies and definitions. So I'd love for you to share your own story, maybe how your experience changed the way you think about disability insurance, and what you want these doctors to know.
No, I was that young physician. I didn't know about this while I was in training. So I didn't get my first policy until I was an attending. Turned out, because of the way that the math works, I qualified for less than I would have if I was a trainee, a resident. And it cost more because I didn't have any of those discounts. Little did I know that my ignorance would play out many moons later. I didn't quite have the policy that I should have had. I didn't increase my policy as my income increased. So when I actually got hurt and was told I couldn't practice anymore, I really learned a lot the hard way. And our group benefit through our hospital in fine print didn't cover work-related injuries. And I was kicked in the shoulder during a difficult delivery. She destroyed my shoulder and my career. And that was a hard pill to swallow. I had never read the document. I didn't know what was in there. And then my private policy, as I mentioned, wasn't quite what it should have been. And so it really impassioned me to make sure that nobody else made the same mistakes I made. And so it's really important that you understand what the language means in both your employer policy, if you have one, in your private policy. You want to make sure that the language is what you want it and need it to be. And yeah, it's changed the way I've looked at it, because now I'm, yelling from the rooftops that everyone needs to pay attention to this stuff. And
Yeah.
I went from being ignorant about it to being pretty good at it. I mean,
Yeah.
I'll
Yeah.
call myself an expert. I'll pat
Yeah.
myself on the back.
Yeah, you definitely are that. You definitely are an expert. But I think you make a really important point that I'm just going to restate, because I think it's something that people forget. Waiting until you make more money will actually cost you more and also give you less benefits with regard to the disability insurance itself. So for many of you who are in school right now or residency programs, don't wait. Like, I get it. It's expensive. I remember when my wife came out of school, she had like $400,000 of student loans. The last thing she wanted was to spend money on disability insurance. But as we talked about earlier, it's so key. It's so important to because you never know what's going to happen. But I want to dig deep a little bit, because we're throwing around a lot of terms, Stephanie, that people may not know what it means. So what exactly does own occupation mean?
So what you want it to mean is that you're considered disabled if you can't do the job that you do day in and day out. And that seems like an easy assumption, but there's no standardization of language in insurance, which is completely maddening. And I always go back to the devil's in the details of the contract, right? And so some policies may define it as what's called held by the national economy and the local labor market. It's not specific to what one employee does at one employer site. That's a mouthful, but it allows the carriers to cast this really wide net that says this is what you would, could, should be able to do based on your training, education, and skill set.
Oh, wow.
Which opens the door for a lot for them to say, you can do this. There are people called vocational specialists. Their job is to interview you and come up with 10 or so jobs that you can do based on what I just mentioned. And so for a lot of these doctors, whether it's an optometrist, a veterinarian, a physician, they're, as you mentioned, coming out with a remarkable amount of debt. I got told I could be a billing secretary because I had the aptitude to learn codes. And no offense, I couldn't have done my job without ancillary help, but that's not what I put myself through to then do, right? And so own occupation, you want it, what you do day in and day out. Total disability, again, you want to look at how it's defined. You want to be considered totally disabled if you can't do the job that you're doing, regardless if you're gainfully employed in another occupation. Whereas many group benefits, and when I say group, I'm talking employer benefits or association benefits. So the AMA, the American Academy of fill in the blank, a lot of those policies, almost all of them, they'll define total disability as the inability to do your job as they've defined it and not be gainfully employed. And most type A folks aren't really hardwired to be stay-at-home people. And you don't want to worry about losing any or all of your benefit while you're trying to figure out what's next.
Yeah.
So I'd say those are the two most important.
Okay. And then just really quickly, what about specialty specific coverage? Does that matter?
So they're used interchangeably.
Oh, they are. Okay.
When I talk about products, I usually do say specialty specific. Again, going back to there's no standardization of language. So some companies call it own occupation. Some call it true own occupation. Some call it regular occupation. You want to be covered for what it is you do day in and day out. And if you cannot do that, no one likes being called disabled, but you want to be disabled if you can't do
Sure.
what you do day in and day out.
Okay, that makes sense. That makes sense. So, Carol, let's take a look at that same disability policy and look at it through the lens, or through a lens, with taxes in mind. This is one of those areas where structure does matter, right? Just as much as the coverage. So there's a detail, I think, in most of these contracts that almost surprises everyone about who pays the premium, and whether that determines whether the benefit is taxable if someone ever uses it. Can you walk us through that distinction?
Absolutely. So if the employer pays the premium and if it is considered a tax-free benefit to the employee, so they're paying it and you're not paying any tax on that, then if you file a claim for benefits and receive those benefits, the benefits will be taxable to you. So similarly, if you pay the benefits yourself, but let's just say you're that 1099 contractor and you pay for your disability insurance, and that would be something you can deduct on your federal tax return as your disability premiums. But if you do that, understand the benefits are then taxable to you. If you pay the benefits yourself with after-tax dollars and then you receive benefits later, those benefits are tax-free. If there's a split between, right, maybe the employer offers a certain amount of coverage, and again, maybe you can buy up, then it's sort of a pro rata split between taxable benefits and tax-free. I will tell you, this is something to, a lot of times the insurance companies will ask for past tax returns to see if you have paid tax on the benefits or not, so they know whether they're going to send you a 1099 or not. Also important to note, in at least in the first 6 months of those benefits being paid, they're also, if they're taxable, they're also generally subject to Social Security and Medicare tax. So again, we're talking about that additional 15%. So just important to understand, and again, if you do have your own entity, something to think about as to whether you want to deduct those disability insurance premiums or not.
Yeah, that's one area that's absolutely key. A lot of folks, when they create their own entities, they run everything through the entity, and that could cause a problem down the road. Obviously, it's nice to get the deduction up front, but the tax penalty down the road, because of the income taxes that you just mentioned, could be pretty great. So okay, awesome. All right, well, let's transition now and let's put ourselves down a few years. Okay, so we've negotiated a strong contract, we've protected our ability to earn it, and now for the first time in our life, right, we're making some real money. And so here's I think something that's really interesting for doctors, because, and I saw this really come out during COVID, which was really, disheartening in many ways. Earning a high income doesn't automatically mean you're creating wealth. And making incredible incomes, and we have a lot of doctors who make incredible income, but they still feel like they're financially behind, or they're, for lack of a better word, paycheck to paycheck, because they've got so many other expenses. But then they meet colleagues with similar types of incomes who seem to have built wealth almost effortlessly, right? And I hear this a lot. And so, and the difference usually I see from my perspective isn't based on how much they earn, but rather the small financial decisions they've made in those first few years, right? So Carol, this is your expertise. So I really want to spend some time here. Imagine someone just finished their residency program, or they're just graduating from school, and their income has doubled or maybe tripled sometimes overnight. What are some of the first financial decisions they should be making? And just as importantly, I guess, what are some financial mistakes that you see people make in those early years?
Right. I think one of probably the most common mistakes that we see, and again, I've been working specifically with doctors for 20 plus years. It is hard when you get out and you start making money and you are, let's just say, 10 or more years behind some of your peers, your friends in college who maybe majored in accounting and finance, whatever, been working, making money. Right. So there is definitely a a tendency to sort of spend too much to catch up, right? You're making good money. You want the nicer car, the bigger house, the whatever. So I think that is a common mistake that we see. And I think secondly, it's sort of, well, as we work with younger physicians, we sort of say, what are the basic building blocks? As you're budgeting out that income, where do we want to see your money being spent, right? It's putting it in the 401k, certainly up to the amount the employer is going to match. It's having an emergency savings fund. It's what should go towards student loan payments. And that might depend on your interest rate. It's consolidating those student loans. It's kind of that whole picture of getting you set up right from the start to start that savings pattern. You know, we have a slide that we show to our investment clients of the difference between starting to save, you know, at age 25 versus age 35 when you're compounding that savings through a retirement plan. So again, physicians are already behind. And if they now push that back 3 or 4 more years, that's a big problem. Some of the other things we see are just kind of what I would call a lack of tax efficiency in your savings and in your investing, right? It's thinking about, should my savings be going into a Roth account or to a traditional, you know, 401k, 403b IRA? How do I manage that? It's asking for help from your financial advisors to sort of walk you through that and model it out so you can see what are the differences and what should I be doing now. It's, if I'm a 1099 contractor, as you mentioned, Ali, if I don't have an entity and if I'm just receiving that income and paying it, you know, paying the taxes via Schedule C, every dollar of net income subject to not only income tax, but also Social Security and Medicare. Should I be an S Corp where I'm taking some salary and I'm setting up a separate retirement plan and I'm getting some of my distributions not subject to Medicare tax, right?
Yeah.
Just things like that, really important. How are my investments being taxed? You know, again, I want to make sure I'm working with an advisor that is focusing on the tax efficiency of my investments, because I'm starting late. I need them to be really efficient as I'm moving forward to really build that wealth more quickly. And you're absolutely right. I can see physicians in the same specialty, in the same area, even with similar practices, whose wealth accumulation is vastly different just based on some of these decisions that they've made early on. And, you know, it really does make a huge difference.
Yeah, and you know, and I'm a firm believer that, you know, you need to also spend money and enjoy your life. And I think what you're saying is that it's about planning more so than just quote unquote saving, right?
Absolutely.
It's about and people sometimes, you know, have these misconceptions. They say, oh, I'm going to spend, you know, or pay off my student loans as quickly as possible. But then because they do that, they aren't able to save enough money, for example, to be able to buy a practice or buy a, you know, or do a startup location.
Right.
You know, I think your point is you need someone early in your career, doctors, to help you plan, right? And everybody's plan will look a little bit different, right? A little bit different, because you may have student loans, you may not have student loans, right? You may be interested in owning a practice. You may be interested in only working for someone else. You might, you know, there's all these different variations, and there's no right or wrong, but you just need to plan, because by planning, you're investing in the most important thing, which is yourself, right? As opposed to, you know, doing something else. So I think that planning, I think that's super key. And Stephanie, let's transition to you a little bit on this, because, you know, disability insurance is usually not the priority, you know, when people are thinking or just starting out, because their future earning potential, you know, ends up sort of being, you know, not something they necessarily think about. But as their income grows, investment accounts increase, and maybe practices, you know, practice purchases on the horizon. How should their insurance strategy evolve alongside that financial life as well?
So there's a few things. Number one, I have been talking about disability insurance for the most part, but life insurance to protect your family is also a key component. I'm not completely against permanent life insurance, but one of the mistakes that I see is that young doctors are getting sold a product that's really expensive, that may not be the right product for them at the right time. I think
Mhm.
that most doctors, and again, I'm caveating with most doctors really just need term life to get them through raising kids, getting them out of the house and getting educated. And again, you want to buy it when you are young and healthy. I will say women should get their first life insurance policy in place before their first pregnancy, because things like gestational diabetes, which is rampant in the United States, will as much as double to quadruple the cost. And so there's also that sort of financial planning that has to go
Mhm.
in. As far as how does disability evolve, well, again, depends on what path the doctor is taking. I always recommend, as your income goes up, you want to keep your insurance at the same pace so that should something happen, you are adequately insured. It was a mistake I made. The guy who sold me my policy sold me my policy. I never really heard from him again. I
Right.
didn't keep pace with my income. And when I got hurt, I was really underinsured. And
Right.
so it's really important. Now, if you're a W 2 employee, a 1099 employee, your individual policy is probably all you need. But for practice owners, then we start talking about how do you protect your business? And there are insurance products like business overhead, which is going to protect your actual practice. If something happens to you, you can keep the doors open, right? And that's a mistake that I see a lot, where practice owners don't think about that next step, and maybe they're protected from their income, but all of a sudden now they're still on the hook for a 5-year lease, or paying their staff, or hiring a locums or a replacement to come and do what they need to do to keep the business open.
Yeah.
There's also other insurance products that are important. Do you have a key person that if something happened to them, you would take a financial hit? There are products that can protect you against losing one of your high producers. If you
Right.
have partners, what does that look like if one of the partners can't practice anymore? There are buy-sell agreements. I mean, I'm getting into the nitpicky
Yeah.
stuff now, but this is important stuff that people need to take into account if they are practice owners.
Yeah. Well, you know, a different inflection points, I think, in your career, there are things that need to be looked at and reset, you know. So, you know, I sometimes I hear, you know, how often should I look at my coverage? Every year? It's like, no, you don't have to look at it every year. But it would be nice if every, you know, couple of years, as things start to change, your income goes up, you know, you start thinking about things like you were mentioning, Stephanie, like, do I need an umbrella policy? You know, how do I increase my insurances? I'm thinking about becoming a practice owner. What do I need for that? You know, and then there's other risks, right? As your wealth grows, right? There's
Right.
different risks that come, right? You know, one thing that I see a lot of doctors do now, which I think is awesome, by the way, from a tax perspective, and if anybody's really interested in this, make sure you talk to Carol and her team on this. But you know, short-term rentals. It's a really great way, you know, once you have some disposable income, to offset some taxes and do different things. But when you have short-term rentals, you have renters, and then things happen, and you know, and so you need more insurance for that, and so it's just about making sure you're protected, right? So, all right, as we wrap up, there's, I think, one lesson that I keep hearing, you know, from this conversation, which is that wealth isn't necessarily built by like a single investment or one year of income or one decision, but it's about intentional decisions that reinforce each other, you know, holistically, right? Obviously, you know, you need good legal planning, of course, but then you also need smart tax planning, right? You need insurance planning to protect everything along the way, and these three things are disciplines that really work together well when they're quarterbacked by someone who, you know, understands the importance of the foundation of getting to financial independence. But as we end in the next few minutes, and I want to leave, about 5 minutes or so for questions, because we are getting some questions. But Stephanie, you've talked about insurance. Carol, you've talked about taxes and financial planning. But I'd love for you to each of you maybe share a quick story, and keep the names anonymous, of course. But what's one thing that you think that you've seen in your career that you want to share with the audience, for them to either avoid or do, or that kind of summarizes everything we've talked about today? And Stephanie, we can start with you if you'd like.
Jeez, that's a lot. I mean, look, my hope is that folks do get this stuff early and young. I mean, I think that's, if I had to give one takeaway, that's it. The younger, the better.
Great. Carol, what about you?
I think it's probably the biggest mistake I see is really a lack of understanding of sort of the different, how the tax world works in this country, and meaning how different entity structures are taxed. What can you do if I'm an owner of a practice? I don't really understand how to manage my compensation structure to maximize both retirement plans and save on taxes. And again, I don't expect physicians to become tax experts, right? That's not what they were trained to do, and not an expectation. But I think it's a look for people who can sort of explain it in a way that makes sense to you and that you can understand, and then that you can go back to your practice or your job or whatever and put some of these tools into place that make sense for you to increase your wealth accumulation. And it's a matter of taking good advice, not trying to do it all yourself and understand it all yourself. Amongst us, we've got probably 60 years of, working with clients, and that's a lot. We've seen a lot of things. We've got a lot of experience. So I think that's a key, is don't try to learn and do everything yourself. Have an understanding of it, but take some good advice from people who do it every day.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect place to end. And I think if you surround yourself with the right advisors who don't just know their discipline, but understand how, these decisions and legal and tax and insurance and others, can impact, each other and impact your ability to earn wealth and become financially independent is important. And for those of you listening, before I hand it off to Amber, if you have an insurance question, feel free to reach out to Stephanie, or tax, accounting to Carol, or legal to me. If we feel like, you need a more holistic advice, we will bring each other into the conversation. So don't feel like you have to reach out to each of us individually. We can start those conversations. So thank you all for being here. Amber, I know we have some questions, I'm sure. So I'll hand it back to you.
We do. Awesome, you guys. Thank you so much. I really feel like we kind of gave a holistic look at insights from all different types of things that they may have not thought about that are connected. And so here at Earned, right, you deserve better. Earned can help, and you can see on the screen, right, for you, for your practice, whatever way you go with your career, we have the expertise that we would at least like to educate you on. Doesn't mean that you need to be a client, doesn't mean that you need to take everything, wholeheartedly, but we would love to just make sure you're on the right path. And so I have your book a free consult. Just let us look at your financial situation and see where we can help. And so we do have some questions from the audience, and I'm going to actually post it on the screen here so everyone can see. This is mainly for tax. So what are the tax benefits of filing taxes together versus separately for two physician household with different work structures, student loans, and finances? Carol, are you able to offer some advice?
Sure. So I will say that is to some extent very, it's dependent on your individual circumstances, certainly. But, in general, for a lot of reasons, you could be better filing jointly. There are things like dependent and child care credit that you can't take if you're married filing separately. There are certain deductions and credits where you get penalized for being married filing separately. That being said, for things like student loan repayment, if you've got a loan that is dependent on your income, then you probably do want to file separately potentially, especially if, maybe you're a physician with a loan, you've got a spouse who's also a physician, right? Separating those incomes out and having lower AGI can be important. I think the most important thing to note is if you work with a CPA, it's really easy in tax software to run the calculation of, are they better off filing jointly or separately? State taxes, that can have an impact on too. Some states you have to file the same way you did for federal. But I think that's the most important thing I would say is, hey, CPA that I'm using, can you run this both ways and tell us which is more beneficial, joint or separate?
And I would agree, Carol, you hit it, right? It's about combined tax planning strategies, not just looking at it from one lens, really getting someone to actually look at all the different options for that specific situation. And again, I do recommend connecting with our team so we can look at that for you and give us your best options. We have another question I'm going to post right now. Looks like for you, Stephanie, would own occupation LTD of a specific subspecialty protect you if you were pursuing additional income at the time of disability through medical work outside of specialty or non-medical work? Can you still receive full benefits and continue to work outside of your own subspecialty? And this might be kind of a combo maybe for Ali as well, but Stephanie, maybe kick us off.
So similarly to what Carol said, that it's individual, I would say it depends. The definition of own occupation for the private carriers is important at 2 times of a claim. So it matters at the time of purchase because we get pigeonholed into what's called an occupational class, which dictates the price of the policy. And at the time of purchase, they're going to be looking at what's your most risked occupation. At the time of claim, they will actually look at what you've been doing to make money in the 1 to 2 years leading up to a claim. If you make the same amount of money doing something else, then they're effectively going to say you have 2 jobs. So it may make the difference between a total disability claim and a residual total claim. If what you're doing outside of medicine is a very small portion, it may in fact be a total claim and you could receive full benefits. So it really depends on what other source of income do you have, what percentage of your overall income is non-medical versus medical, and then they'll make that distinction of what type of disability is it.
Absolutely. And again, I feel like these questions kind of have common themes, right? We don't always know exactly what your situation is because we haven't looked at it. And the most important thing you can do is just allow us the time to look at it and help you, guide you into what you should do next. Is it a tax strategy? Is it an insurance strategy? What are you missing? Do you need Ali to look over that contract? And so I think the biggest takeaway from today is if you don't know where you're at, let's figure it out for you. And again, thank you to our panelists. Are there any key takeaways that you want to leave with our audience to really take it home?
Who wants?
Oh,
Carol,
yeah.
go ahead.
I think Amber did it well. It is just, look for advice, gather advice from people who work with physicians day in and day out, because they're going to be able to better sort of dive into your situation more quickly without you having to educate them. Probably a key.
And I would double down on that one. It's all about getting good information from people who really are knowledgeable in their field and have the experience of working with doctors, physicians who really understand our plight because it's not the same as someone who comes right out of college and starts working.
Yeah, and I would just say start early. You know, whatever you do, you know, start early. You know, have someone in your corner helping you. There's not always costs associated with that, and so just have folks near you, you know, advising you. You know, these were two great questions, two really, really good questions, and I'm sure there's a lot more questions that people have who are listening and will listen to this webinar. So yeah, send it over and you know, start early.
Thank you to our panelists. I really appreciate all the expertise you gave today. And this is just the beginning, right? Like we just scratched the surface on all the little details that go along with early career. And so we will continue doing these. So again, as Ali just stated, if you have questions, please reach out, book a consult. It's just the beginning of your successful career. So thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye,
you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.